Okay, I should be ready. So we are doing neural today. So let's get rid of some of the fuzz.
Granular cell tumor.
Granular cell tumor. It was pretty good from scan. So this particular one is a little pale, actually. Usually it's the bright pink around the color of erector pili that helps. Let's see, it should be. That's better, so that people joining us can actually see what's on the screen. There we go. So, in this case, you look around the granular cells, it's a little pale in color compared to your usual neural granular cell tumor. And although the cells are granular, I'm not seeing the giant lysosomal bodies, the so-called pustulo-ovoid bodies. And those two things together raise the possibility of a non-neural granular cell tumor. I do see one giant lysosomal body right up there. That's about it. They're certainly not common. And so there are granular tumors that are not a neural GCT. And so different in color and also lack of the giant lysosomal bodies are clues. Okay, so we've got scalp there, and then very deep. Yeah, exactly. Meningocele, in this case, possibly a true meningocele. You have Samoma body, which you get with meningioma as one of the tumors. Another one of the clues is it's one of the tumors that gives you collagen balls. In this case, collagen balls with wrapping. So you commonly see these gray processes that wrap around the edge of the collagen ball in a meningioma. Often present in aplasia cutis congenita, especially bullous aplasia cutis. I've got a couple of blistered slides here. So palisaded encapsulated neuroma, lots of little nerve fascicles with clefts between them. The clefts not typically present in a neurofibroma, but typical of a palisaded encapsulated neuroma.
Palisading means what?
Oh, so the palisading is Verricae bodies may be present. So the palisades of nuclei.
Blue tumor, capillary pattern. Purple comes to mind.
So there's a trabecular pattern with parallel and branching theque, similar to trabecular bone. It's a small blue cell tumor, and that in skin is usually Merkel. You do have to stain for confirmation. There are other neuroendocrine tumors, lymphomas, small cell endocrine carcinomas, neuroblastomas, other things that can do it. In a child, neuroblastoma becomes much more likely. You look for squashed carrot cells. Most of those other tumors are less likely to produce a trabecular growth pattern. So, adult sun-damaged skin, especially on the ear, and trabecular growth patterns certainly suggest the possibility of Merkel.
Is it you? Oh, sorry. It's kind of like maybe a diffuse.
So it.
Or actually, maybe a schwannoma.
So it sits in a capsule, right? And that always suggests something that's round to oval with subcapsular edema always suggests the possibility of a schwannoma, but also intraneural neurofibroma is possible, or a piece of a plexiform neurofibroma if just one worm is plucked out. And so if you want to be certain, you can always get a neurofilament stain. Schwannomas are devoid of neurofilament, and neurofibromas have them spread out throughout. You can often, though, see them. You look for little gray circles, little gray dots, which are the neurofilaments cutting cross-section. And you can see them here, and then you would pick them out with a neurofilament stain to confirm that it's a neurofibroma rather than a schwannoma. Especially a plexiform neurofibroma would have significance in terms of patient management. So plexiform, and then is the background dermis normal?
No, it's diffuse neurofibromatosis.
So there's diffuse neurofibroma with plexiform embedded in it. That is always loss of heterozygosity of neurofibromatosis, von Recklinghausen's disease. So you have a background of diffuse neurofibroma embedded in that, a plexiform neurofibroma. That patient has von Rex. They were born with only one allele instead of your normal two, and then in one segment they lost that remaining allele, so they have no tumor suppressor gene at all in that one Blaschko segment. And so all hell breaks loose. They tend to be pretty darkly pigmented, that whole segment, so there's a massive cafe au lait spot, and under that a diffuse neurofibroma with plexiform neurofibroma, because you have no tumor suppressor gene product at all in that particular segment. In the segment, because there is no tumor suppressor gene product, it tends to grow beyond the confines of a normal Blaschko segment. So they're plaques rather than curved Blaschko segments.
Some areas are mixoidy. I would want to get a little closer to see if it's granular, the cytoplasm, for GCT.
That's a reasonable thought. Where do you think you are anatomically?
It looks like the scalp. We have a lot of...
And what about the center? Where's the hair?
Kind of obliterated.
Yeah,
Really
so not a lot of hair in the center. And the whole thing is kind of loose.
Yeah.
You do have these structures.
Maybe a meningocele.
Exactly. So you have collagen balls, and then you have something wrapping around the edge of the collagen ball.
Mm-hmm.
And that on a hairless patch of scalp is rudimentary meningocele. So meningothelial cells are supposed to coat things, cover things, so they wrap collagen balls, collagen bundles. You see the little gray extension at the edge where it wants to wrap around that. So those collagen balls, vascular-like spaces, often together with them, are typical for a rudimentary meningocele.
So this looks like a diffuse neurofibroma.
Like a diffuse neurofibroma. So it is myxoid, loose, like an NF. It keeps on going. It grows into the fat in a pattern identical to DFSP. You get single-file lipocytes just like DFSP. The biggest differential is myxoid DFSP, which tends to be recurrent, so often there's a history of a prior DFSP that helps. If you have a question of whether it's myxoid DFSP or diffuse NF, get either a neurofilament stain or an S100. Myxoid DFSPs lose their CD34 positivity. So CD34 doesn't particularly help you, but absence of S100 staining and absence of the diffuse neurofilaments help in that differential. So diffuse NF, myxoid, diffuse growth pattern, growth into the fat, very much like dermatofibrosarcoma protuberans, differs in that it does not express S100, which is probably the easiest way to tell them apart, as well as history.
So this looks hypercellular. Kind of looks similar to neurofibroma, but hypercellular, so I'd be concerned about a peripheral nerve sheath.
So MPNST, when it's truly hypercellular, this one, I don't know that it's really packed. So in terms of background versus nuclei, is there more background?
More background.
More background.
Yeah.
So
Maybe just
MPNST should have more nuclei than background.
Okay. So
Okay.
just a diffuse.
This has more background than nucleus. It has lots of mast cells, they're normal morphology, normal little fried eggs. So like a diffuse neurofibroma again. Diffuse neurofibroma is virtually always von Recklinghausen's disease. Again, it's loss of heterozygosity. You get a plaque with a diffuse neurofibroma with or without plexiform embedded in it. One of the twists on this one, let's see if I can find an area. I'm not seeing much here, but supposedly there were parts of this that had melanin pigment in them, which any neural crest tumor can do. It brings up the differential of Bednar tumor and myxoid Bednar tumor, and again, an S100 would be the best way to differentiate.
The mast cell, could the mast cell be a differential?
Mast cell can help, except that myxoid DFSPs, anything myxoid gets mast cells.
Okay.
So myxoid DFSP gets mast cells as well. So then that isn't unfortunately very reliable to distinguish.
So it kind of has. What is it? Granular cell.
So we look higher, the cells are certainly granular, and this one is loaded with giant lysosomal bodies, which tends to be a marker of a true neural granular cell tumor. Granular cell tumors that are large, have atypia, have mitoses, are suspect for malignant behavior. How large is large? When I was a first-year resident, it was 8 centimeters, then it was 5 centimeters, now it's 2 centimeters. Bigger. It means that there is accumulating evidence that things less than 8 centimeters could still metastasize in the absence of high-grade atypia or mitoses. So larger GCTs should at the very least be completely excised. Where you would modify that is probably a large GCT taking up much of the tongue. You probably don't want to create functional disability to remove it. But for the ones on trunk or extremity, those are easy enough to do.
Focal cell carcinoma.
Yeah, so it's certainly a small blue cell tumor. In areas you can make out a trabecular pattern, and you would want to confirm with immunostains. Some people still use neuron-specific enolase. It's so broadly positive in tumors, some people jokingly call it non-specific enolase. Probably better would be either a chromogranin or synaptophysin, synaptophysin together with a keratin 20, showing you a nice para-nuclear dot pattern. Perinuclear would mean like a bullseye surrounding the nucleus. This is a para-nuclear dot. Everyone says that wrong. It's not the end of the world.
Merkel cell carcinoma.
So this is Merkel cell carcinoma in a lymph node, and you see two things. One is you see the blue areas of the Merkel cell. The other is where are the germinal centers in the lymph node? No germinal centers, right? That's complete effacement of nodal architecture. So this is someone with CLL and Merkel cell carcinoma. So old people get both. And so effacement of nodal architecture, which means there are no germinal centers in the node, you look for lymphoma. And then subcapsular is where most metastases are. In this case, small blue cells that look like Merkel. So it shows you two things, effacement of nodal architecture plus the metastasis for Merkel.
GCT.
So this looks like a typical GCT. What's lacking that many have is the dramatic pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia, which can be misinterpreted as squamous cell carcinoma. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, for people to have radical neck dissections for squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue that turns out to be just PEH overlying a granular cell tumor. And again, the granular cell tumor has that vivid pink color, similar to the color of erector pili muscle, or some people have said everything that Barbie owned was that color, and then the giant lysosomal granules. Well, it's a little bit different. There's a lot of Merkel cell in this box.
Kind of hypercellular, patchy, kind of myxoid,
What shape?
encapsulated.
Encapsulated and oval. And then what is this pale crescent here?
Loose myxoid.
Crescentic zone of subcapsular edema.
Schwannoma.
So that would be typically a schwannoma. Schwannomas commonly palisade. Verrucae bodies present in parallel palisade. This one shows plenty of verrucae bodies. Palisaded encapsulated neuromas sometimes have verrucae bodies, which is why they share that feature and have that in their name. The edematous areas that don't have verrucae bodies are called Antoni B. It can be all Antoni A, it can be all Antoni B, it doesn't much matter. They all share that they are oval with a capsule and a crescent-shaped zone of subcapsular edema. And that's what defines a schwannoma. So it's a big oval thing with a capsule and a crescent-shaped zone of subcapsular edema with or without Antoni A tissue in the center. So when you have this kind of onion skin fibrosis in a dermal tumor, look for the presence of neutrophils. If neutrophils are present, it's probably erythema levatum diutinum. If no neutrophils are present, it's probably a sclerosing perineurioma. Any stain that you might do for confirmation?
I mean, you can try to stay the nerve, the center, so like a neural stain maybe.
But it's perineurium stains how? EMA, so epithelial membrane antigen. So perineuriomas, just like normal perineurium, are strongly EMA positive in the vast majority. EMA is also useful when you are tracking a desmoplastic melanoma that's perineural. You will hit areas where it just looks like normal perineurum, except that it's S100 positive and EMA negative. That's still desmoplastic melanoma. When it switches and loses its S100 positivity and now is EMA positive, that's the normal perineurum. So at the edges of neurotropic melanoma, you're looking not at the nerve itself, but at the circle that wraps and surrounds the nerve. That circle should be S100 negative, EMA positive. If it's the reverse, it's still desmoplastic melanoma. And you can, of course, dramatically reduce the recurrence rate by not leaving desmoplastic behind surrounding the nerve. So that would be a good thing to do.
Superficial tumor.
Certainly an ugly tumor. It's mainly nucleus, no cytoplasm. There are at least some parallel thick patterns. So you might think melanoma, Merkel. It's arising in conjunction with Bowen's disease. Merkel and Bowen's disease are commonly seen together. So that's very, very common for Merkel to have a background of Bowen's, and then you look within the Bowen's, there's some smaller blue cells. That's probably intraepidermal Merkel. Merkel tends to do Yatterson type nesting within the epidermis, similar to melanoma, Bowen's, or Paget's. So epidermotropism, intraepidermal pagetoid and Yatterson nesting, association with Bowen's are all common Merkel features. I don't see anything on that. Oh, there's one tiny little. I don't think we're going to do that one. Okay. Let's do this instead.
Fine, how are you?
So you are correct that it's a schwannoma because it is oval, it has a capsule, and it has a subcapsular crescent-shaped zone of edema. So oval, encapsulated, crescent-shaped subcapsular zone of edema is schwannoma. Other name for a schwannoma is neurilemoma. They're the same. Merkel. Merkel, lots of Merkels.
Neurofibroma.
So probably neurofibroma. They often are perivascular, periadnexal in configuration. They're diffuse, myxoid. They usually have denser and less dense, more myxoid areas. When you go higher, the cells are somewhat sinusoidal, wavy, and that's all typical for
There
neurofibroma.
are some clefts.
Say again?
Some clefts.
Oh, some clefts are present in it, so would make you think of the possibility of a palisaded encapsulated neuroma. And that would be a minor sin to say one instead of the other.
Hypercellular.
So certainly some areas are hypercellular.
Other areas, so
and they look like mature nerve, do you see any atypia?
Yes.
Does atypia alone make something malignant in the neural crest world?
Not pretty nice.
Yeah, there have to be mitoses or an elevated proliferative fraction. So so-called ancient atypia is common in any neural crest lesion and does not equate with malignancies. So look for mitotic figures. Look for true hypercellular growth where there's no background, it's just packed with nuclei, and look at proliferative fraction with key 67. This particular example has granular cell. Any neural tumor, especially neurofibroma, can have granular cells in it as well. So I would suspect this is probably just ancient atypia in a neurofibroma, but the next step is to look at proliferative fraction, look at the clinical presentation. If this is sudden hardening and massive enlargement of a neurofibroma in someone with von Recklinghausen's, I'm more concerned.
There's a lot of pseudoepithelioma, hyperplasia, and then the cells kind of look like they have the color and like the salt and pepper chromatin of Merkel cell.
So they have color and salt and pepper chromatin like a Merkel cell. They're nested in the epidermis similar to Bowen's.
Yeah.
They're also within the dermis, and we know that Merkel cells love to be epidermotropic and nest within the epidermis, so we would do confirmatory stains, but none of what we see is shocking. So GCT, again, you look at size, you look at atypia, you look at mitoses, you look for presence of giant lysosomal granules for a neural-derived granular cell tumor. Let's see. We may want to switch to potpourri already. So I think we've covered the essential things here in this chapter, so let's grab a potpourri box. So those can go back in there. This, unfortunately, is all trash at this point. Okay, let's rock and roll.
It just doesn't have capsules. Yes.
Okay, whose turn?
It's my turn. So we have newts in the horn.
Give me a differential for newts in the horn.
P6. So psoriasis, tinea, impetigo, candida, subderm, syphilis.
And if you did a PAS, you'd see some vertically oriented fungal structures.
Candida then.
Probably candidiasis. Tinea swims, candida dives. But you usually don't have spongiosis, so even though they swim, they don't like to get wet. Right? I don't know how that happens, but if it helps you remember it.
Yeah. This also looks like there's stuff in the horn.
So there's some stuff in the horn, and in this case, is it neutrophils or just parakeratosis?
No, it looks like parakeratosis.
And then what's in the epidermis?
Spongiosis.
Spongiosis. And what are these red things?
Red blood cells.
Put it together, what do you think?
Like PLC.
So PLC tends to be spongiotic or interface?
PR.
PR. So PLC would be similar, pityriasis lichenoides, but would be interface with a lymph in every hole. This is spongiotic with extravasation, which tends to be pityriasis rosea. So pityriasis rosea, spongiotic with red cell extravasation. Pityriasis lichenoides interface lymph in every hole with red cell extravasation.
This is like a pale tumor hanging off the epidermis, maybe like a trichomoma.
Yes, and there's a peripheral palisade, like a trichomoma. Now you just look to see is there a little bit of a thick base of membranes in there. But it's pale, it hangs off of the epidermis, and it has a peripheral palisade. Be careful, they are tricky, those trichomomas.
Dermal tumor, small, uniform. I originally was thinking glomangioma or glomus cell tumor. We have a lot of mastocytoma.
Mastocytoma, they're all fried eggs. One of the clues are how evenly spaced they are. Glomus can line up in rows like that, but doesn't have the pink cytoplasm. So, pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia with neutrophilic microabscesses, so PEH with pus. Can someone give me a differential for PEH with pus? Here come big green leafy veggies, so H for halogenoderma, C for chromomycosis, B for blastomycosis, G for granulominguinale, L for leishmaniasis, and V for vegetans, P vegetans. So you look within the giant cells to see, do we have organisms? And in this case, see that asymmetrical refractile wall. So what is that organism with the asymmetrical crescent-shaped refractile wall? Blasto. So that'd be blastomycosis.
Coilocyte.
Lots and lots of coilocytes. So this is
It's a wart.
a wart. A wart with lots and lots of coilocytes.
A little faded.
That's the stain's a little pale.
Vascular.
You have vessels. You have cells with a focally corkscrew appearance to the nuclei. Let's see these corkscrew nuclei. That's a nice example there, right? Which means they're myofibroblastic, and it's forming a whorl or nodule. So probably hypertrophic scar. If you added some bubblegum collagen in the middle, then it would be a keloid. So whorl or nodule of myofibroblasts would be hypertrophic scar. So pyogenic granuloma, I heard lobular capillary proliferation with septi.
Dc081d12. So some lymphocytes, maybe some needle cells in there.
Maybe some Neva cells and some lymphocytes. Are they mixing?
Yeah, kind of mixing. Like
So if they're mixing, then this would be halonevus. So the band goes through intimately mixed with the melanocytes in a halonevus, whereas they are at the periphery in a melanoma.
Those broad shave. There's some dilated vessels. Capillary. Poro.
Cornoid lamella at the edge, yes. Porokeratosis. Center of poro can look like anything. Looks like a wart. Hypergranulosis, hyperkeratosis. The keratin is fairly compact. So, a verrucoid hyperplasia, probably a wart. It is a Merkel cell carcinoma, so even when you're in potpourri, Merkel's can occur, as they do in real life. So blue cell tumor. This one has a spiky infiltrated pattern, which Merkel's absolutely can do. It's the most common pattern after trabecular, after diffuse and trabecular pattern. Piloleiomyoma, you see the spiky pinwheel-like appearance at the periphery. Multiple piloomyomas are associated as part of Reed syndrome with fumarate hydratase deficiency. Yep, steatocystoma. You have that wavy red so-called shark's tooth cuticle of a steatocystoma, and you don't actually have to see the sebaceous glands.
Some sort of tumor in the dermis. Just has like a easily tied.
And is it up in the dermis, or is it forming a deep nodule?
Deep nodule.
And the matrix is collagenous or more diffuse, even with some little chondrocytes in it.
So is it a mixed tumor?
A mixed tumor of skin. This is the type that's not branching of alveolar, but small tubular, the type that was called chondroid syringoma. If you have an adnexal tumor and you don't have a clue what it is, think mixed tumor. Right.
Specular seems like was looking for pigment turned out. Can like drug.
And do you think it's acute or more chronic?
It's more chronic because of the pouring of the acanthosis.
Yeah, so it's more chronic. It's definitely a lichenoid interface process. You would think of things like lichenoid drug. What if this is an old person who they said looks kind of like EM, looks like Stevens Johnson? His eyes and lips look bad.
Rowels?
So Rowles absolutely would be in the differential. And what else? PNP is the other. And PNP, you often do not see acantholysis. It looks lichenoid. So paraneoplastic pemphigus and Rowell syndrome, excellent, well done. Someone passed that easy button. You have to choose your language.
I don't know where the choose is, but one classic.
C'est simple. So chronic stage of something lichenoid could be lichenoid graft versus host, could be acral lupus. If it's hypertrophic like that and you want to know has it gone over to squamous cell carcinoma or not, look for the CD123 dendritic cells. They are numerous in lupus. You lose them when it becomes malignant, when it becomes squamous cell in the periphery. And then with the clinical appearance, both Rowell syndrome and paraneoplastic pemphigus would come into play, and immunofluorescence would be a reasonable next step. Time for here.
Grayish
Yeah.
material.
So there are histiocytes palisading around this stuff. What is it?
Gout.
Gout. It's got the feathery appearance of gouty crystals.
So it looks like slender acanthosis. Overlying newts in the horn.
And are the newts diffuse in the horn, or are there newts on top of para, on top of newts, on top of para,
That one.
on top of spongiform pustules?
Yeah, so like psoriasis.
Psoriasis, the one thing with the narrow elongated reedy, you might look for presence of interface, look for endothelial swelling, look for any other feature of syphilis. But probably just psoriasis.
On the superficial dermis, I think this is like Paisley tie.
It's a Paisley tie differential, so this is on the eyelid of a young kid with Downs, and
Syndrome.
yeah, but it doesn't really look like that. It looks spiky, right? So the truth is, this is an expanding plaque, scar-like in an old person. Morpheoform BCC, which is probably more likely what that is with its focal spiky islands.
Pink dermal clear. If that's smooth muscle, I think a piloleiomyoma.
Looks like smooth muscle, like a piloleiomyoma. It's a little bit pinwheely at the periphery, not as much as most are. Most really have those pointy fascicles sticking out. So either it's a very thin patient with a collagenous core, or this is an ear. So the question is it just PEH, or is that real atypia? And there are quite a few mitoses, which you can see in both. Atypical mitoses would certainly lead you more towards squame. Thick irregular nuclear envelope would lead you more towards squame. We are seeing at least some tripolar mitoses. So this would be squamous cell carcinoma arising in something very acanthotic, anastomosing, and full thickness. So arising in background bones. So squame on the ear arising in bones. That's another Merkel cell carcinoma. You can see very distinct branching trabecular patterns similar to trabecular bone. Architecture.
I see.
Lichen sclerosis, hyperkeratosis, either acanthosis or atrophy, which is why we've dropped the A, because sometimes it's LS but not A, especially when it's scratched. Zone of pallor and homogenization, and then band-like infiltrate. The band, sometimes sparse, but always present in lichen sclerosis, absent in morphia that mimics lichen sclerosis, absent in radiation dermatitis.
Biopsies, some crust, some acanthosis.
So give me a differential. First off, you want to know how atypical those cells are, right? So if there's atypia, it could be a crusted bones. Other things with newts in the horn.
Psoriasis, Canada, syphilis.
So you'd want to run through that whole differential. So is this
Spongiosis.
Haley or just spongiosis?
Spongiosis.
So first off, you can see the cell-cell junctions. You see all those little spines telling you it's just spongiosis, and there are no red rings around the nucleus, which you would expect in Haley. So put it all together, it could be a chronic crusted dermatitis. Can psoriasis be spongiotic? Commonly, any type of psoriasis other than ordinary plaque psoriasis. Guttate, erythrodermic, inverse, those are all spongiotic. Acral.
It could be a basal cell.
Yeah, I don't see great retraction space. Could it be a trichoep?
I mean, it's kind of spiky. For
It's kind of spiky. Spiky things will hurt you. There is no benign spiky. Right? Remember, your mom told you spiky things will hurt you. So. Angiosarcoma, well done. Pass that easy button over here. So you see something ugly in the dermis with crack-like spaces.
That was easy.
That is typically angiosarcoma. Yeah, neutrophils in the dermal papillae, like dermatitis herpetiformis. Do you have a differential for things that will give neutrophils at the DE junction and in the dermal papillae? It's the plaid differential, so pemphigoid can occasionally be purely neutrophilic. Lupus, bullous lupus. EBA, epidermolysis bullosa acquisita, which can look just like pemphigoid. Linear IgA, and then the D for DH in the plaid differential. And then your next step would be immunofluorescence to help sort those out. Yeah, like a piloleiomyoma, there is atypia, which could be just symplastic, right, which is like ancient change. You'd look at degree of hypercellularity, you'd look at how deeply infiltrative it is. This one's a little more cellular than erector pili muscle, right? So this falls into that range that the soft tissue people like to call atypical smooth muscle tumor. It's not going to metastasize, but get it out. And
PG.
so is it capillary-sized vessels with septi, or is it dilated, widely dilated capillaries within a ball and claw-like appearance of the epidermis with hyperkeratosis? The second one, so it is angiokeratoma, correct. And if you have a superficial angiokeratoma-like component and the deep portion looks more like Kaposi's, then you have targetoid hemosiderotic hemangioma. Like a pilomatricoma, you have all your shadow cells. It has a rolls and scrolls appearance, very much like proliferating tracheal tumor in outline, but is composed of shadow cells, calcification, sometimes ossification, in which case you can call it a bona fide example of pilomatricoma. We have little nips of tissue here. And what is it? Coilocytes, it's a word. Probably verticoplana in this case. Maybe GA, or if top to bottom, side to side, with zones of devitalized collagen and a layer cake-like appearance.
An LD.
Yeah, so this one could go either way. It's, look at the clinical, both are diabetes associated.
Looks like there's bone in there.
Or at least calcium.
Yeah, calcification.
And then what's the lesion itself?
Vascular?
What's that? Probably a vessel lumen. Where does the wall end?
No, it doesn't. It ends in tumor.
It ends. It is the tumor. Be the tumor.
Yeah.
So what is it?
Angiolioma.
Angiolioma that got old and calcified. Happens to the best of us. Beats the alternative. Okay.
Is this like lining of a cyst or just fragments?
What are these things?
They look spiky, kind of. Blue tumor, like a basal cell.
Yeah. This is where people curette the basal cell and just rinse the curette off in the formalin. There are people who do this. I will hunt you down and kill you. Would it kill you to give me a little shave before you curette it?
It's funny.
Be nice to your pathologist. They're nice people.
Still don't look great. Very hypercellular. Encapsulated or lobular?
And what's that tiny little pale crescent under the capsule?
Oh, is this a schwannoma?
That's a schwannoma, and this is just a very hard young schwannoma, mainly Antony A, with all the palisading varicate bodies in it. And I think that's it.
Thank
Stop
you.
right there. So we did almost 100 slides. Not bad.